2 years ago would have been too early. 2 years from now, I think would be too late. We're at the right place, the right time, with the right team, with the right leadership here in Canada.
Can you remember a time when more people were talking about defense, security, and resilience than they are today? I can't. So we're going to get into that and why it is, but we're going to do it through a bit of a side door. We're going to talk about finance. So joining me here today is Kevin Reed, the president and COO of the Defense, Security, and Resilience Bank Development Group, and Toronto Global CEO Stephen Lund. And in this episode of the Boardroom Brief, everything we want to talk about relates to how do you finance resilience and security. Let's get right into it. Kevin, first question over to you. Tell us what's the DSRB is all about and kind of what problem it tries to solve.
Well, thank you for hosting us today. The Defense, Security, Resilience Bank is being set up to be owned by member nations. So our target is 40 nations between the Atlantic Pacific. Most of those would be NATO nations. So very much in the realm of a World Bank or an EIB or an Asian Development Bank. So that kind of format. So a multilateral bank. The sole focus of it is on defense, security, and resiliency lending and infrastructure support financially. The problem that we are solving is that over the last 10, 15, 20 years, the plumbing of the defense finance category has been thoroughly gutted, principally driven by ESG, but it fit into that narrative that if you wanted to lend, if you're a commercial bank, if you were a institutional account, like from a pension fund, and you wanted to look at this as an asset class, it didn't fit into your ESG narrative. 2025 was a turning point throughout the Western world, where most banks have rewritten their ESG policy to now include bank credit, bank investing. And so we're seeing that shift come through. And the problem that we are working on is rebuilding the plumbing of the defense finance sector.
Now there's three words in the name of the bank: defense, security, and resilience. I think the defense side is relatively straightforward, obvious. Tell me a little bit about the security resilience thing, because I hear conversations and not everybody kind of knows about the breadth and the depth of what the bank would be financing.
Absolutely. So part of this is directed behind the NATO 5% commitments that were given or approved in June of 2025. And so the defense and security bucket is one that's well-defined. It has been under NATO. And as you know, many countries have been at that 2% threshold, or it's trying to achieve that or higher. The resiliency piece is a new piece in that 5%. And that's 1.5% of the 5 can go towards resiliency. So it would be things like ensuring that your electrical grids are sufficiently stable. It would be resilience as in rare earth minerals, critical minerals, so the development of that in your metallurgical plants. It would also ensure that you have proper infrastructure. It could be rail lines that you would use as dual purpose. So the resiliency side is ensuring that your infrastructure in your country is stable enough that it could withstand certain levels of attacks. That could be cyber warfare, that could be missiles, it could be a number of things. But the resiliency piece in that 5% is 1.5% as defined by NATO. Defense and security is the hard security side, and that's been pretty common as a definition for quite a while now.
Stephen, we'll throw it over to you for the first question, more about the Canadian context. What would a bank like this need to succeed in Canada?
So just to pick up on what Kevin said, this is a tremendous opportunity for Canada. And it's doing, it's overcoming some challenges today around defense financing, particularly for small and medium-sized businesses. So we know those are the challenges. So what has to happen is, for any location, the most critical thing is we need instant credibility. You need expertise, you need talent, and you need the ability to scale. And all that has to happen quickly, just really to show the rest of the world that whatever location is picked, that is ready to handle this.
We know that the Defense Industrial Strategy was just released. We know that sovereignty is on the top of many people's minds in Canada. What does this mean in the Canadian context for you, just at large?
So I think taking that great example, a great definition, if you look at it from a Canadian perspective, there's a number of things. One, a greater economic sovereignty for Canada, more control over your supply chains, impact on national security, the ability to produce and scale and sustain defense technologies, some resilience against shocks in the economy, some more influence with your allies, long-term productivity gains, And a big one is retention of IP and talent, which has been a big issue in the country for many years. All that, overlaying that is the Defense Resiliency Security Bank, which really provides an opportunity for Canada and for our companies to step up and be active players in the defense industry.
Yep, totally makes sense. And that answers a little bit to the timing that you're referring to as well, right? I wanted to shift gears slightly and just evolve the conversation into something that I suspect would be on a lot of listeners' minds, and that is just like, where are we in the process? I think the bank started to make major headlines kind of late summer, but really, at least in the local context, made a boom in December. But it's been going on for some time. So Kevin, question for you. Why don't you walk us through where we're at, what milestones can be sort of predicted in the next, quarter or so?
So part of the history here is that we started this process of staying the bank up 1 year ago, just over 1 year ago. And so we've made tremendous headway with 40 nations. We have our global banking partners. A lot of that forcing function was that 5% trigger or the vote from NATO, because then that forced a number of activities within nations. And so as we went through that process in 2025, we hosted an information day in the city of London in September, and we had 37 nations, 175 delegates attend this day. 4 central banks attended. And so that was a key milestone for us, that there is a need from a member nation perspective to look at their alternatives for defense financing. From that point, we started to organize anchor nations, and those will be defined as the nations who will come together to negotiate the bank charter and the treaties and the governance and the capital structure. For Canada, of particular interest is the host nation, which Canada's clearly put its marker down seeking that host nation. So Canada was the first G7 country in. We have about 14 countries who are preparing to start those charter negotiations. We expect them to start some point in March. If we look at history as a guide, we know that the multilateral banks that have been stood up, it's an average of 21 negotiating days. That could be spread over 2 or 3 months, or put everybody into a room for 21 days and you don't come out until you get a charter. That's one way, like Bretton Woods was. And so we expect that to start in March. And Canada's hosting this. It will be hosted here in Canada. And we would hope that as we come through the month of April, we would start to have a formation and agreement on the draft charter, on the charter itself. Once that happens and you have alignment and a signing ceremony, then every country has to go back and approve it through its legislative body, or Canada's context through Parliament. And that will take 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, but you need that ratification because of the treaty elements and based in the bank charter.
Another thing that I've noticed in the relatively short time period that the bank has gone from like an idea into a reality is you've received a lot of support from major banks, and my eye is obviously on the Canadian ones. Tell me a little bit about why that's such a credibility piece and what that means for the development process.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that our first banking group that came in August of 2025, that was all on the back of the NATO commitment, and nations started to move. RBC was the first Canadian bank, first bank, in fact, but first Canadian bank to step in, and we had a number of good international banks like JP Morgan and Deutsche Bank and ING and some other ones. At that point, though, in August, we didn't know Canada might not be, we didn't know where it's going to go. As we moved through September and October, and we have a prime minister who was elected in May that obviously understands a multilateral bank better than perhaps most leaders, it started to emerge that Canada was a real contender to be, which we haven't got there yet, but to be a host country. So in those discussions and briefings with all the other 5 Canadian banks on defense finance and what this bank would do for them, they expressed an interest to jump in and help out, whether it be with people with secondment, what resources could they have. And they also knew that, and I had communicated this to them, it's vital that for Canada, for the Prime Minister, if we want to win this, we need alignment with our financial industry. And every bank of the big 6 stepped up and showed their support.
I want to get Stephen back in the conversation, but to do so, I want to ask a question that I know is on his mind, and also issue a bit of a proviso for you. As part of the development group, we know that you're sworn to neutrality around the host city. But I wanted to start by saying to you, what are some of the ingredients, just wherever it lands, that any good host city would need to have? And then I'll kind of pitch it over to Stephen to talk a little bit about what Canadian host cities have to offer, and potentially Toronto.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me just clearly define, our group has been set up to find a country that would be the host country. Behind that, obviously, I'm a Canadian. I'm proud of being a Canadian, and all the axis is turned towards Canada. And so our role will be to look at what are the core competencies of each city. Do they have physical infrastructure? Do they have consular services? Do they have a talent pool that you can draw on quick, because the scale of this bank has to occur quickly because the threats around us are real and imminent. And so at that point, we will consult, advise the government of Canada if Canada, in fact, is selected as the host country. And then it will be up to the Prime Minister and Cabinet to determine, in their view, where would be the best city.
Yeah, and that's the key point to reinforce, right? That the country is selected, and then the country itself selects host city.
That is correct, yeah.
Okay, so Stephen, I know that you're probably chomping at the bit, but let's start not by talking about Toronto, but just first, like, what are these ingredients? In your mind, what does a host city need to successfully headquarter or anchor this bank?
Credibility. I mean, if you're making a decision of this magnitude, where a location could be, any other financial centers in the world, you're going to need, as a host city, instant credibility. So Canada has to show credibility right away. In order to do that, we go with our strength. Like, what is the major banking financial center in the country? What is Toronto? And what would a decision maker look at, or decision makers look at? It's really, what's the financial depth? What's the infrastructure around legal, regulatory, compliance, all those things? Is it globally connected? What is the talent? The scale, scope, breadth of the talent? What's the feeder system, like universities, in place? And are they ready? Those are all the things that I think will go into a decision in terms of where does the defense bank set up its initial headquarters. And again, in my mind, it's hard to make that decision without knowing what the core cities offer. And all the cities in Canada have something to offer. Where's the banking center? It happens to be in Toronto.
Now, Kevin, I'll flip it back to you, because as you've said, your group doesn't decide the host city. You're thinking country first. What are some of the other countries? You've mentioned some who will be involved in the charter, but what are other places outside of Canada that are making a push for the bank?
I think we saw 2 weeks ago the Prime Minister of Luxembourg was in Canada to meet with Prime Minister Carney, and they issued a joint statement about supporting the DSRB. And Luxembourg has been very clear that the supporting Canada, but the European office, and there will need to be one, just like there will need to be one in the Pacific theater for those nations. Luxembourg would like to host the European office, which would be a smaller one than the headquarters, but no less important. Luxembourg's got a great financial center. They have an active bond market that trades many of the World Bank bonds and EIB bonds, or multilateral bonds. So they are a financial powerhouse in Europe, and I think we saw that announcement a couple of weeks ago. So that not only supported our Prime Minister, Luxembourg put their hand behind that, but they did put their hand up that they would like to be the European office, which there will need to be one for sure.
And I also saw recently that Carney was speaking to the UK about supporting the bank and potential involvement. Can you speak anything to that? This is just stuff in the headlines.
Yeah, I was not in that conversation, by the way. But I would say that there's active discussion, and so our thought, or the government of Canada's thought, is that we'd like one or two more G7s in that negotiating group, and I know we'll get there when it starts in a few weeks. And what the Prime Minister say behind the closed doors, I'll leave that to them.
Totally. It's interesting how you mentioned Luxembourg as a potential European sort of side of things, because one of the things that I've seen quite a bit around some of the bidding process, mostly bidding to the PMO here, is the different models that might be used. And one of the things that I wanted to ask both of you about, but I'll start with Stephen, is we often hear this notion of Toronto being an anchor city and in a kind of a hub model. Can you tell us a little bit about how that might work, or what Toronto's merits are beyond what you just mentioned in terms of our finance firepower? How might Toronto benefit the country at large?
If Toronto is the center for the new defense bank, there's tremendous opportunity for other cities across the country to participate on a hub-and-spoke model. And you take a look at across the country, places like Montreal that offer a great aerospace foundation, Halifax, obviously a naval center, same with Vancouver, Ottawa, a growing technology center, Calgary energy. If we can work at that hub center is in Toronto, but working with many of these cities across the country, I think that would be a huge win for the country.
Without putting you in a position that you can't kind of speak to, and I promise I'll do this, that hub spoke model, anchor, sort of hubs around the country, how does that align with the thinking of the bank? It seems like it does because you're already talking about Europe versus a potential Canadian headquarters. We don't know how any of this will shake out, and I know that you can't let us in on internal conversations, but I'm thinking more of the mechanics at large here without commenting on Toronto. Does a sort of a hub and an anchor model align with the priorities of the bank?
Let's start with nations. And so if we are going to maintain a AAA rating, we will need to be diversified in our offices because we're talking about a defense bank. And it would be certainly, unfortunately, if the European theater did move into a war footing, more war footing than they have in the Ukraine and Russia, you need to have robustness in your ability to keep operating if you lose a banking center. And so having that resilience is going to be really important. And part of that hub and spoke in the context of nations, you'll be able to transfer operations and the book of business, and that's part of the design. As it relates to within Canada, I think what Stephen highlights is the strength in different regions and geographies, and I think having a hub and spoke, the other Canadian banks do that today. In fact, I was just in Halifax and I met with a number of banks, and RBC has a technology group there. So our Canadian banking system is built like that, so there's no reason why when you have a headquarters, wherever the Prime Minister chooses, that you can't have some kind of hub and spoke based on the core capabilities of those areas, and also to have some diversification for geography just because of that resilience piece of business continuity, which is going to be vital.
Okay, Kevin, one for you is the wider global context around military spending in NATO. There are massive increases that have been promised. We know they're in store. I think the number is something like 1.5 trillion up to 4 trillion. That context really matters around this bank. Tell us about what the implications of this increased spending are and what it looks like in terms of preparedness.
Yeah, when you think about the run rate right now of 1.5 trillion to 4 trillion by 2035, those numbers are as big as you've seen since World War II spending. And so I referenced earlier the plumbing of the finance industry, defense finance industry has been gutted. Our bank, the bank of the DSRB, is being stood up principally to help solve that credit issue. 99% of the companies in the supply chain in defense are private. The only source of capital are the commercial banks. And so if you're in the supply chain and you need to expand your premises, your only source is the bank. So we're there to provide those credit guarantees to the commercial banks so that they can get the velocity of money out, so that they can build that plant so your wait times are coming down when you put an order in, if you're Department of Defense or Department of War, and your pricing starts to come down. And so if you don't have expanded credit, which we're going to be one tool to solve, then you have longer wait times and higher pricing. And so you have defense inflation, and that doesn't solve what the spending is trying to solve.
The other thing that I wanted to ask you about, and I feel like it's related, although not by the numbers. I mean, you mentioned that this bank has been in the works for about a year, but then you have that moment that really sends a massive boom across, global democracies with Carney's speech in Davos. And you must have felt that you were sort of prescient in thinking through the bank. So just talk about where we're at in terms of that part of the global landscape, where we know the extra spending is taking place, but there seems to be a changing mood around sovereignty, around resilience, and the need to be prepared.
Certainly, Prime Minister Carney's speech in Davos has filled a void of leadership within many countries. And so that's part of that lens that countries are looking to Canada and looking to our leadership from our Prime Minister. The whole notion of sovereignty, I think, is being tested not only within the NATO allies, but certainly some more visible foes who would choose to cause us harm, state actors, non-state actors. And so the whole notion of sovereignty and the timing for this bank, 2 years ago would have been too early. 2 years from now, I think, would be too late. And so I would like to say that our team knew this was going to be exactly how it unfolded, but that's not entirely the case. But much in life is about luck, and you have to be in the hockey game, to use a Canadian metaphor, to be able to score that overtime goal. And so we're at the right place, the right time, with the right team, with the right leadership here in Canada.
And I want to ask you one other thing. I remember some remarks that you made at the tail end of 2025 about the Canadianization of NATO. You were quite happy to see that. Can you shed a little bit more color and light on what you're seeing in that capacity?
Yeah, this is all about leadership. And I know, Canadians are now more prepared to invest in defense, invest in their sovereignty. We see threats and challenges all around all of us. And so the Canadianization of NATO was a term I popped into my head at that moment, but it really is Canada's back. You wouldn't have seen this a year and a half ago, but Canada's back with the strong leadership we have. And Stephen, you mentioned the premiers. Premier Ford has been a big champion of sovereignty, of standing up for Canada, standing up for Ontario. And it's the leadership like that that matters in the world. And so when we walk into a room and they know that we're from Canada, they know that we're serious about the responsibility that Canada has in the world as a G7 nation.
Yeah, and I'd even throw the mayors into the mix. I mean, I'm thinking of the Toronto mayor in my own context, but all of the various bid cities in Canada, their mayors have been very strong in their alignment. And so I wanted to turn this to you quickly, Stephen. Forgetting advocating for Toronto as a host city, what does it represent that all of Toronto and Halifax, Vancouver, Montreal, etc., what does it mean from that Team Canada approach? Why are cities so aligned between federal, provincial, and municipal levels to go after this thing?
First of all, I don't think this would have happened 2 years ago. I think the enormity of the situation over the last few years and what we're seeing around the world, the leadership that we have across the country, I think that's what's galvanized everybody across the country to say, we want a part of this. From Halifax to Vancouver, we want a part of this. And that's why I think the hub model works great. Getting everybody involved, supporting Canada's bid, first of all, to get it here. I think we have alignment right across the country. Do we want it in Toronto? Absolutely. Do they want it in Halifax or Vancouver? Absolutely. But the fact is that we're all pushing for this. Every level of government, the entire business community across the country. It's a fantastic sign that I don't think we've seen for a while. So that's why amazing opportunity for Canada. I think now's our time.
Kevin, what does success look like 10 years from now for the bank, regardless of where it ends up locating? What does that, long-term picture look like for you?
We have, being we Canada, but we have a number of military alliances, NATO, Five Eyes, and there's no reason why we shouldn't have a capital markets alliance. And that's what this really is, aligning the depth of our capital markets among our allied nations to support deterrence. None of us want to go to war. Our people who want to do us harm, the stronger we are, the more they will pause and think about that. That's a core statement of fact. So in 10 years' time, if we can deter war because we've marshaled our economic and financial resources to better equip not only our military, but all aspects of warfare, economic, cyber, you can go through the list. If we use our capital markets to our strength, that will be number one success to deter war, or hopefully prevent war. Wherever this bank lands, the defense finance ecosystem around, we're solving the credit issue, we believe, or working on solving the credit issue around, we'll follow that as private equity, venture capital. And one area that doesn't get talked about much is the defense insurance side. And so all of those areas have been hamstrung by ESG, and they're all changing rapidly, but the nature of defense is really unique versus other industries. And so that core competency, capability to build a defense financial hub for those 40 nations is going to be really important. So that would be success, to deter war, hopefully prevent war, because we've marshaled our economic resources, and build a financial ecosystem that understands the defense capabilities and uniqueness within all countries that we work with. So that would be success.
As we start to close, I always like to do this for the listeners. Is there anything else that you'd love them to know about the bank, the process, where we're at?
We in Canada have a moment in time that the world is looking to us to lead. And that was clear after the Prime Minister came out of Davos. It's clear as this is shaping up, countries are supporting our Prime Minister, supporting Canada, frankly. And so I would like to just reinforce that leadership matters. Canada's back. A year and a half ago, when you go to NATO or you go to these other countries, we were almost becoming irrelevant. That isn't the case anymore. And so this is our time in Canada to grab this, to take the leadership role, and play to our strengths, which is we're not a hegemonic power, but we are a trusted financial center that almost like Switzerland with G7 financial standards. So I think that would be my closing discussion on this. I think it's a real important time for Canada to stand into the center of this, lean in hard, and take it.
Gentlemen, thank you for a fantastic conversation. Super insightful. I'm excited to learn more. If you want to learn more, we have all the links and information related to the Defense, Security, and Resilience Bank below, and we'll see you next time.